What is up, everybody, and how's it going? I'm Alex Goldstick, and you are listening to the Spring Forward podcast. After a break, we're back with an all-new episode, and just in time for the Spring League's next showcase. The Spring League will be in Miami for the first time from November 6th to 9th. The league has been announcing some high-profile players that will be in attendance. Check out the Spring League social media accounts to see some of those players. For today's pod, we're talking to video game developer David Winter, who is the creator of Maximum Football 2018. The Spring League is Winter's first corporate sponsor for the game and will be incorporated into it during a major update later this month. To hear more about Winter's background in football and game development, let's get to the interview. David Winter is the president and co-founder of Canuck, a Canadian content, video games, and hobby products company. Earlier this fall, the Spring League announced a partnership with him and his game, Maximum Football 2018, to rebrand the game's practice mode as the Spring League. The update, including the Spring League, will release later this month. David, welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, and this should be fun.
So, first off, congratulations, I suppose, on being our first Canadian guest, and we'll start off in that vein. We've had CFL players on the podcast before, but none of those players were actually Canadian or grew up with the Canadian game. So, as a fan of the game, first and foremost, can you talk to me about your original passion for the sport and originating in Canada and not so much with the American style we're all maybe used to?
Well, I grew up in an Air Force family, so both of my parents were in the Royal Canadian Air Force, and so we moved around quite a bit. And when I was very young, we were living in a small city just outside of Regina, Saskatchewan, home of the Rough Riders. And in the early '80s, or very early '80s, my dad took me to my very first sporting event, which was a Saskatchewan Rough Rider game. And it was a very cold and rainy and chilly October game, and it was against the Edmonton Eskimos, and Edmonton proceeded to storm all over the Riders, and it was a brutal showing by the home team. But I just fell in love with the sport at that point. My blood turned Rider green, and I've sort of grown up around the sport of Canadian football ever since then. I played football in high school. Canadian high school football uses 3-down, 12-man rules, and so I was playing the sport that I grew up on. Eventually, I sort of didn't grow big enough to keep playing the sport. Everybody else on the team sort of kept on getting bigger, and I sort of stayed where I was, and so I couldn't play it on the field anymore, but I never stopped following it.
Now, before we get into sort of how that the love of football manifested itself into what you do today, is there a particular Canadian view on American football, whether NCAA or NFL, that Americans may not realize?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a passion for just the sport of gridiron football in general. I think obviously Canadians are aware of both types of rule sets probably more than Americans are aware of both types of rule sets. So I think here you get more people talking about both styles of game. Whereas, of course, in the States, it's really just focused on the 4-down, 11-man version. But I think the fans that appreciate gridiron football don't get caught up too much on the different rule sets. The rule sets have evolved in such a way that they balance each other out. I mean, Canadian football has 3 downs, but we've got an extra man, whereas in American football, you've got 4 downs, but only 11 players. So all the different rule nuances sort of balance each other out, and you end up with pretty fun and exciting versions of both types of the game. And I think that's just how the Canadian football fans look at it.
Now, you talked about your high school playing career. You also spent a good amount of time in the Canadian Navy. But how did you first get into game development? I think that a lot of people consider themselves gamers, quote unquote, but they don't have the first clue about what goes into the development of the games they love. So for those that aren't familiar with the back end of gaming development, what are the very quick basics on that development and the things you need to know when you start from scratch?
Well, you're right. I mean, I one of my hobbies as a kid when I was growing up was making games. I had a very old TRS-80 color computer Model 1. It only had 4 kilobytes of memory, so 4,000 kilobytes or bytes of memory. So tiny amount of memory to deal with. It plugged into the back of your television. It booted up into a rudimentary version of BASIC, and you loaded your programs off of a cassette tape. So it was pretty low-end tech, but it was the machine that I started developing games on. They weren't, of course, very sophisticated. They couldn't have even competed with an Atari 2600 type game, but it's what got me into writing code and learning the basics of structuring programs. And I did that through my elementary school years, and my computers got a little bit more sophisticated as I got up through high school. When I left high school, I got out of gaming altogether, and I spent just about 10 years in the Canadian Navy and served my country for about 10 years. When I left the Navy, I got back into software development and found myself getting back into gaming. So it sort of became full circle. Started out as a hobby and then found myself doing it as a professional. What I did as a kid really had no bearing on what I was doing as an adult. In terms of the knowledge and writing code, there's absolutely nothing that you can compare the two. The tools and technology that are out there now for game developers it's a quantum leap. What was out there just 10 or 15 years ago. When I wrote my very first version of Maximum Football in 2005, game engines like Unity and Unreal and others, they didn't exist. So everything that you wanted to do to draw objects on the screen and make football players run around on the field, you had to not only write the code that managed the sport and managed the game of football, but you had to write all the code that rendered objects to the screen, and you had to invent your own physics system and your own audio system, and you had to invent all the infrastructure first before you could actually make the game that you wanted to make. But now with commercial game engines like Unity and Unreal, a lot of that or most of that infrastructure is there for you made. It allows you to just concentrate on making the games and not worry so much about making the technology work. And so I think that's kind of the big difference between what's available now and what I started out with.
Well, so you already mentioned the game Maximum Football, but before we get into that, and I hope I'm not skipping too much time between your military service and this, but I wanted to touch on your first venture into sports video games, which was a Canadian football-specific title called Pro QB, which I believe became rebranded as CFL 99.
Yeah, so that was just a little hobby project that I did. It was a very simple sprite-based top-down game that ran on Windows, and it didn't use DirectX or anything like that. It was really just Windows hardware, so it wasn't very fancy. But it did evolve into actually a licensed product, which I thought was kind of fun.
So. We won't, settle on your competitors too much, but I do want to talk briefly about EA, or Electronic Arts, as most gamers would know. And they're responsible for some of the biggest sports titles in the industry. And that includes FIFA, Madden, NHL, Tiger Woods, or now Rory McIlroy, PGA Tour, and so on. And although now you're a competitor of sorts and an independent game developer, you actually worked on some of those titles for EA for a number of years, and they're actually Canadian too, for those that don't know. So what was your time at EA like, and how do you view them now that you've entered the space as a competitor?
Well, yes, I did work at EA. I worked out of the Vancouver studio called, it's just EA Canada, Burnaby, and I was there from 2005 to 2010. The sports titles are not all Canadian. FIFA Soccer, NHL, NBA, they're done in Vancouver, but the North American football titles, Madden specifically, and formerly NCAA, they are created out of a studio in Florida called Tiburon. So there's a split between the two studios that do the sports titles. But my role was producer for Sports Online. So my job with all of the sports titles, regardless of what shape ball they used, was to design and create all of the online feature sets for all the sports titles. So my job was to, for example, create, I had a big role in creating a feature that became EA Sports Hockey League and FIFA Clubs. I had a role with helping out with Madden's online franchise a few years ago when it was launched. So my job was less about the on-field, on-ice gameplay and more about the online feature sets that sat on top of that. But that said, EA is an enormous company. I think there's about 9,500 people working at the company globally across all their studios, and it's very easy as an individual to sort of get lost in that mass of people. I've learned that I much prefer smaller studios, and being an independent developer, running my own company, earning a living off of my own work, I take a lot more satisfaction out of that than pretty much anything I ever did at EA.
So after EA, we get to 2013, or correct me if I'm wrong, but you might have had a couple more stops in there, but you founded your own studio called Canuck Play in 2013, and that's based in Ontario. So did you get working on your second crack sort of at a Canadian football specific game right away, or what were the steps in between deciding you wanted your own studio and taking a shot at sort of a professional version of the game that was a hobby in the late 90s?
Well, I was just wrapping up a position in Montreal. The role that I had for a publishing company in Montreal was coming to an end, and so I was starting to look for doing something else. And Cheryl Lokes, my partner in the business and partner in all things, she was living here in a small city just outside of Toronto called Peterborough. And she was living here, and we we had a relationship. And she finally just said, "You know what? You've spent the most of your career creating other people's visions, taking their ideas and bringing them into fruition. So now it's time for you to create your own company and bring your own ideas to the world." And so that's kind of what we sat down and figured out. I had still have a lot of contacts in the gaming industry, and I reached out to a few of them here and there, and they pointed me towards a independent developers program that Microsoft had started up for allowing small studios to develop and publish games on the Xbox One. So I reached out to them. And it just so happened that the product manager that I spoke to at Microsoft, I also worked with at EA. So it was kind of a strange coincidence that we sort of knew each other. But they helped get Canuck Play up and running. They became a partner. They provided a lot of the development hardware and the software licenses to help us get started. They really liked the fact that we were trying to do something that was different. Yes, we're doing a sports title, but it's bringing a little bit of Canadian culture into the gaming space, which has been lacking for a few reasons. But they were very on board with getting that to work out, and we've sort of been up and running ever since. We became clients of a technology innovation group here in the city of Peterborough. They have a facility called the Cube, and it's basically an office building that helps technology and digital media companies sort of get up and running. So we partnered with them, and we partnered with Microsoft, and within a few months we were up and running and developing games. And 2 years after that, we pushed Canadian Football 17 to the Xbox One. And then this past July, we pushed Maximum Football 2018 to both Xbox and PS4. So it's been quite a hectic ride.
Now, when you were creating CFL 99, I actually read that you partnered with the league and were able to get some licenses to use players' likeness and teams. Licensing is obviously a big part of the sports gaming landscape, and this go-around is a little different from you. They obviously make the user more familiar with the game. They have real logos, real players. I'm sure a lot of other things I'm glancing over right now, but you've developed Maximum Football without that. And I believe the Spring League is the first official branding or partnership of any kind that you'll have in the game. But how have you been able to get around not having licenses to still have a successful game? Do you find users are more interested in the game and strategy than the real players?
Well, because Maximum Football Maximum Football is really designed to be a sandbox for the football gaming fan. We are trying to not provide a single experience for the game player. We want the game player to create their own experience. So Maximum Football 2018 provides rule sets for Canadian football, American professional football, and U.S. college football. And depending on which rule set you prefer, you can just set the game up and it will play those rules. And we've tried to get those rules as close to real world as we can. So if you switch from Canadian to U.S. college, you get the U.S. college field size with the hash marks in the correct place. You've got 11 players. All the clock rules work according to U.S. college rules, that sort of thing. So we've really tried to give the player that unique rule experience. The other thing that we've tried to do is allow as much customization as we possibly can. So players can pick leagues of different sizes. They can edit the teams. They can edit the players. They can even go in and change their own uniform. So if they're not happy with the uniform colors that we've provided for at their favorite city, they can go in and they can change the uniform designs and colors however they wish. When we launch our content update later in November, which will include all the Spring League branding, we will also be including a logo editor. So people will be able to go into the logo editor and through the manipulation of some basic shapes, they'll be able to create their own logos. So even if we've not provided the logos that they're interested in, they can create their own logos and create the experience that they're interested in. So not having a license from one of the big professional leagues isn't really slowing us down because people are happy to create their own worlds.
Now, apologies for going back to Madden one more time, but can you give us sort of the top line on how Maximum Football differs from Madden and sort of what group you're trying to service with those who were dissatisfied with Madden?
Well, I guess the biggest differentiation is what I've sort of already alluded to, is Madden is an NFL experience, and that's all you get out of Madden. It's NFL branding, it's NFL rules, and you're pretty well restricted into that sort of experience. Maximum Football is all about maximum customization and creating your own world. So if you're not happy with the Madden experience, you're not happy with just the very narrow world and gameplay experience that Madden provides, we provide an option for players to create whatever world they're interested in creating. And we do it at a much lower price point as well. So I think we provide quite a viable option for people that are become dissatisfied with Madden.
You alluded to it, I believe, in your last answer, but all about a customization. And actually, one of the cool things that you've been able to do without a license is that you got to make an entire Canadian Football League for your game and come up with 9 Canadian team names in the cities that the real CFL actually has teams in. I read that those names include things like the Ottawa Lumberjacks, the Edmonton Rhinos, the Calgary Rustlers, and obviously there's 6 more. But I'm sure that was fun. I think every sports fan thinks or wishes they could come up with a league full of sports franchises that they named. Was that just a fun brainstorm, or did you have some kind of process for that naming cadence?
Well, one of the points that I should jump in is we have a 10-team league as well. So we Maximum Football also provides a team in Halifax, which the real world Halifax doesn't have a professional football team.
So getting ahead of CFL expansion.
We have the ability. Our fans on the East Coast can actually play the Halifax Mariners. I did spend a lot of time coming up with names and logos for the teams that I was going to create for all of the markets. We also have a U.S.-based team in the game, so you've got Dallas and Pittsburgh and Denver and a lot of the major U.S. cities also have teams, and they have their own logos and preset team names, which you can change if you don't want those. You can change them, but the ones that come with the game, I spent a lot of time trying to have a little bit of fun with them. When the city of Ottawa was founded, it was very much a city based on the lumber industry, and so I glommed onto that, and it's the Ottawa Lumberjacks. And Toronto has not many people know this, actually. I was surprised, but Toronto's city's nickname is Hogtown. And so when I created my team in Toronto, I nicknamed it. I took that nickname and I nicknamed my team the Wild Hogs, and so I just had a lot of fun with it. I picked Edmonton Rhinos because growing up and watching the Edmonton team play for real, that's sort of how they've always played the game. They plow through the opponents just like Rhinos would. So I tried to have a lot of fun with the names and come up with logos that sort of suited. But if somebody buys the game and they're not happy with what I provided, they can just change it.
Now, all that above brings us to the reason you're on this podcast, and that's the Spring League partnership. So can you take us through behind the scenes of the partnership, or at least what you're allowed to divulge with the Spring League and how that came about?
Well, I have a publishing partner, Spear Interactive. They operate out of Hamilton, Ontario. And between the two of us, between our two companies, we spent a lot of time looking to see how we can take our title to another level. And the best way to do that, or at least one of the best ways for us to do that, was to start putting together corporate sponsors and corporate partnerships inside the game. You see this pretty much every sports game on the market has these kind of partnerships in place. And so it was our turn to start putting these partnerships into place. And Maximum Football shipped with a practice mode, and practice mode in our game allowed for our gamers to go into a specialized play environment and just run and execute plays from whatever yard line they choose over and over and over again until they got their, until they perfected executing their plays. And so it made sense for us to reach out to the Spring League and say, you know what, we've got a feature in the game that allows gamers to hone their skills virtually, and you are a league that allows real players to hone their skills in real life. So here's this really wonderful kind of synergy between the two types of experience, and so why don't we just try to put them together? And thankfully that all worked out, and so we've got an official partnership in place that we announced a few weeks ago, and we started showing off some screenshots and things, and it's our practice mode with Spring League branding on the field and in and around the other parts of the user interface of the game. So we're pretty happy with that partnership and how it's been working out.
Now, you said that the update, including all the Spring League branding, would come later in November. Is there a specific date we're allowed to tell people yet?
No, it's we have to. Every update that we do has to go through a certification process, and this is quite a substantial update because we are adding a logo editor and we're adding a few other new features to the game. So the Spring League branding is one of 3 or 4 major additions to the title that we're adding in November. So I am wrapping up the development in the next couple of weeks, and then we send it off to Microsoft and Sony, and they send it through the certification process. And so we're looking for a launch towards the end of November, but until it comes back from Microsoft, we really don't have a firm date because we have to make sure that we get certified before we start talking dates.
So that brings us to our last question, and it's really just sort of a big overarching one, but where does the game stand today? I mean, it sounds like you have a major update coming at the end of the month, which will, even sort of kick off some corporate partnerships for the game. But we went from CFL 99 to Canadian Football 2017 to Maximum Football 2018. What's in store for the future of this title and Canuck play in general?
Well, we have already Maximum Football is the only, besides Madden, Maximum Football is the only other annual football title on major consoles. So we have put together a multi-year plan of how we're going to grow the title. We're already putting partnerships and agreements in place for Maximum Football 2019, and we're going to start rolling information about those partnerships and agreements. We're going to roll those announcements out over the next few months. We are very much looking to expand the college experience for our college fans. There's definitely a void in the marketplace, and we are looking to address that and hit that market. So we're going to be growing that part of the game. But we have a 5 or 6 year plan, and we're well on our way to reaching all the goals that we've set out for. So the future is bright for both Maximum Football and Canuck.
Well, David, thank you very much for your time. I think that the sports gaming landscape needs a shakeup and needs some competition. So I know the Spring League is very happy to be a part of your game, and we can't wait to see the update later this month.
Well, I thank you for your time, and I hope everybody listening goes and checks out the game and likes what they see.
All right, that will do it for this episode of Spring Forward. Thanks so much to David for talking to me and teaching me more than I ever knew about the landscape of the sports video game industry. Stay tuned to the Spring League social channels for an official announcement on when the league's integration into Maximum Football 2018 will be available for download. You can follow the Spring League on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at the Spring League. You can follow me on Instagram at Alex Goldstick and on Twitter at AGStick. All music was provided to Spring Forward by Joshua Rosner. We'll be bringing you the stories of the next crop of Spring League players from Miami soon. Later.